So I finally finished up the build in the Tower 500 PC case by ThermalTake, and I just wanted to come back here and share with you what my thoughts and opinions are overall of this case. I want to talk to you a little bit about what my experiences are building with it, which hopefully will inspire you as to what you can accomplish with this case, maybe give you some ideas of some things you can do, or maybe even more importantly, give you some ideas of what not to do with this case, right? You may not agree or like what I've done with it. But I can just save you the time and trouble. Overall, my opinion of this case is very positive. I think it's a great case to build in. It doesn't present a whole lot of challenges. It's got a couple little quirks in it that we'll talk about. But overall, the aesthetic is a large reason why I bought this case. It's a case I've been waiting for a while. And it's held up to that standard. So a couple of the things I did here was for an aesthetic that I personally really like. And so anyways, let's go ahead and get into it. I think the thing that you're going to notice first off is that I chose to do a mini ITX board in this, which is kind of an odd thing to do, even though, you know, it's capable of doing that, right? But it's not something you would normally do. In fact, I had an ATX motherboard sitting around exactly for this build. But when I was doing the teardown video and playing around with this case initially, one thing that I really liked about it, that I thought was just really cool, were these rear fans, just the way they kind of were sitting back there. It was just kind of a really cool look to me. And so when I was kind of really figuring out what I wanted to do build-wise, I kind of really hated to cover both of them up. I just thought it'd be cool if I could just keep one of those fans visible. And that's when I thought, well, just try a mini ITX board in there. I've got one sitting around. It's a B450 board. There's nothing really special or unique about it. It's a gigabyte board. So overall, I'm pleased with the result. Now, you can roast me in the comments below if you think this is stupid, because that's fair enough. One of the advantages I get with that is along the bottom edge of that, because it does change where the cables go through the back panel into the back, and they go right there underneath the board. It's got a row of LEDs right there, which looks pretty cool. I've kind of got them just matched up to this lighting right now. I do really like the clean look that I've come up with. There's not a whole lot of extra RGB in there, you know, like the triangles that we've looked at and some of the flexible RGB elements. This is almost a build, I think, that doesn't really benefit from those too much. But something like right behind the video card might look cool, maybe some triangles around there. I might play with the aesthetic of that and see how that looks. Now, as far as fan locations and cooling options, playing around, I was gonna do a 360 rad in there. Now, the hardware in here is not super powerful. This is a 3800X AMD processor. So I just chose to do a 240 on the top. As I was playing around with the location of the 360 on here and with that motherboard specifically, I didn't really like the look of how the cables ran in any orientation. And so it wasn't that it wouldn't work, it would work. I finally decided on the 240. I had that, you know, I've used that in a couple of other videos, and that just seemed to look the best to me. But anyway, so that's why I chose to do that, is really from, you know, the aesthetics, and the cooling on it is just fine with the testing that I've done so far. That's on the top, and I did replace that with two LL120 fans that came off of this old PC. So I kind of like the look of that as opposed to the 8 LED fans that came with it. They don't look as good. Now, the second fan that I chose is because I opened this back fan up for looks. It does come with two 120 millimeter just standard fans. There's no LEDs or RGB LEDs in them. And so because of that reason, I went ahead and swapped that out with another LL120 fan. But primarily, I replaced that fan just for aesthetics. And the LL120 fan is a capable fan for what I need to do. Now, over here on the side, because I'm not going to do another AIO in here, I did decide to add 3 fans. Because these are going to be facing internal and there's an aesthetic that we're going for here, I chose to go with a QL fan. I had a set of those laying around. Now, QL is kind of like the LL120, but it's just a quad loop, and meaning that it's got you know, the rings on the back side of that so that you can get that aesthetic. That was largely the reason for choosing that. Now, I didn't show this, I don't think, in the teardown video, but when you're going to do fans or a radiator up here, these side panels, you can flip them in either orientation. So the filter, you know, the air intake filter, you can put it towards the back or you can put it towards the front. So you just flip this around, then it's really just like a standard PC case at that point. These are intake fans here, so drawing cold air from the side here. And anyways, it looks really good. The cable management, there's a couple of ways I could have gone about it. I went ahead and just chose to go down the back, and then I just went straight back on the power supply panel and into the basement of this case. I probably could have tucked it around in front of this panel, would have been less visible. There's not a whole lot of room between the side panel and that power supply cover. Anyways, for the front two fans, chose LL120 fans again. I had a pile of those from the old PC that I tore out. So I'm reusing some of those, and they're good fans, still in good condition. And so these are intake fans as well down here, and they work really good. So the only other fan that is here is the included 120 millimeter fan, and I left that in place. I did flip it around. Out of the box, both of these back fans, the only included ones from ThermalTake, are both exhaust fans. This other ThermalTake fan over here, I flipped it around and made it an intake fan. What that does for airflows, hard to say exactly, because that motherboard tray is right in front of it. But again, overall, my initial testing with cooling and everything, now I haven't smoke tested it or anything crazy like that. But the cooling on this has been really good so far. That's it for cooling. I've got the 2 intake fans down here, the 3 intake fans over here, so 5 total. And then, the one in the back, so really 6 total on the intake. And then 3 exhausts, the 2 AIO fans and the LL120 over here on the side. And then the power supply I flipped upside down, so it's just pulling cool air in from the bottom and shooting it out the back, so it's not really playing a part. But probably either way on the power supply would have been fine. Another advantage of the mini ITX board is I wanted to use the streamer cables by Lee & Lee. I think they look great. These are the V2 cables. With that motherboard being kind of further up, or that connector further up, it just allows more of that cable to stretch out. So again, more just aesthetic stuff that's really not necessary. But overall, I think it just looked really good. The GPU cable is a little more of a challenge to kind of bend around. There's a couple of places I could have ran it, and I probably still need to tweak it just a little bit. Now I currently have these synced up with Corsair, just using the typical traditional Corsair adapter cable, but I can take it out of that mode and do the standard Lee & Lee stuff. Because as far as lighting control, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Corsair fans, and then 1 non-Corsair fan that has no RGB lighting at all. So how I'm controlling these is I've got a Commander Core XT in the basement here, and basically that Core XT is controlling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fans. So now the AIO I chose to use is the H100i Platinum. Now one advantage that you get to this, and I've never discussed this before. In fact, I did the video on how to add more than 6 fans, and this wasn't an option that I really had looked at. So I'm gonna mention it here just in case anybody's interested, but there'll be more videos of that coming up eventually. But the H100i Platinum, the heatsink itself is the controller. So coming off of that, you've got the USB cable, the SATA power cable, and then you've got the 2 cables for both of these fans, the RGB, the Corsair RGB of course, and then 2 of the PWM cables. And once you connect that, it shows up in Corsair iQ as an H100i. Now the big advantage to this AIO then is that you don't need any additional ports to get it pulled into iQ. So anyways, I've got the 2 front fans, 3 on the side and the 1 in the rear into the Commander Core XT, and then the remaining 2 on top are their own controller in the H100 Platinum. So that's worked out really well, saving me to have to add some other additional controller. Now this fan in the rear here, I could have plugged it into the motherboard, but what I did choose to do was I plugged a splitter into the Core XT, and I plugged both of the front fans into that splitter. So these 2 are being run off of a single PWM power speed control port. And I've got this remaining ThermalTake fan plugged into the other port in the Core XT. Now the one downside, and maybe we'll change this at some point, a reason maybe to change this fan out, don't see a need to right now. Well, take that back. I do see a reason to change it out. But because that's into the Commander Core XT, Commander Core XT cannot control the 3-pin DC controlled fans. And so because of that, this fan just runs full speed back here. I can't control it. Now, as far as noise goes out of this case, when I turn everything down, it's very quiet. It's not silent because there's a lot of fans in here, but it's very, very quiet, well more acceptable to me. Except for this one fan in the back, I can just hear it going because it's running at max RPMs. So I think I've got another LL120 fan. I'll probably just swap it out with something that's a 4-pin PWM fan anyway, so I can get some speed control out of it and I can quiet it down. So anyways, that's kind of the cooling setup that I've decided to go with here. Now, as far as the testing goes, I've done some benchmarks, and basically, a lot of times when I build a PC for myself personally, the testing that I do is I kind of, I get it set up, and I go ahead and I just run all the fans and everything at the minimum that I can get it. And you know, if I can turn some of them off, I might play with that a little bit. But anyways, all of these fans at the minimum RPM, you know, 550 to 600, even the pump at the minimum. And then I'm going to run just some 3D mark benchmarks, the CPU profile, just try to heat everything up as much as I can. Let that run for a while, let the coolant get nice and hot. And even at that, I think, you know, the maximum CPU temps I was getting was, you know, 77, 78. And, you know, GPU, maybe the max on some of the benchmarks that I ran, I was, you know, getting into the mid 70s, you know, low 70s, and the coolant temps were never more than maybe 35. So now when I go ahead and run those same tests and amp up the RPMs on everything to the max, which, you know, normally you're going to run in some sort of balanced mode, you know, you're going to put some fan curve on these, so when it's not doing much, it's going to be quiet, and then as you game, it's going to automatically ramp up. But I like to just kind of test the two extremes to know what I'm going to get out of it. And so anyways, when I run everything you know, at max speed, I get several degrees better out of everything, and definitely within the range that I'm comfortable with. And I'm really rarely ever going to be running at those maximum things. You know, there might be a few times as you're doing some long gaming sessions, which I still do occasionally. It'll be nice to know that that'll just hum along just fine. And we'll check those temperatures from time to time. Now, I'll probably do some more in-depth temperature testing over time, because this is kind of fun to mess with. And chances are I'll be messing around with this PC a little bit as we go anyways and trying some different things. But cooling-wise, this PC seems to run pretty good. I don't have any issues with it. There's lots of options for cooling. The airflows in it seem just fine. Again, you know, take that for what it's worth. Your setup and your hardware is going to be different than mine. For this setup here, it's worked just fine. I'm not setting any you know, records as far as cooling goes with it, but it's acceptable for the use I've got with it. I'll be able to game on this just fine and do really well. And you know, some of the stress tests in 3D Mark, they've passed just fine. I haven't had any major issues with cooling. So that brings us to cable management. Now, cable management's a little bit different for everybody, and for me, I didn't spend tons of time tidying up everything in the cable management department here. I try to make it look good at the front, but this is a PC that, you know, I'm a tinkerer like a lot of you, so I like to occasionally, I will tear this apart and kind of move things around and maybe try some different stuff. So I try to cable manage with that in mind of I'm going to be tearing this apart. So I try not to lock every little thing down. I do like it tidy so I can get in there, especially if there's a problem or even when you're going to change and upgrade things. So, you know, but cable management's one of those things that you can spend hours and hours and hours and try to get it done. I'm going to just rate this case as really good on cable management, largely just because there's a lot of space everywhere. There's no cable management specific functionality to it, meaning there's no molded in, you know, cable rails and things like that, but there's lots of anchor points, you know, places to put zip ties. There's definitely many options to make it look really good. You can go as far with cable management as you want. The basement in here is super roomy. If you leave the power supply trays in, you've got all sorts of room to put cables down there. You know, even if you make it a mess, nobody's really ever gonna know. And so on the top here, from the I/O panel, this is maybe one place that's not super well thought out. These cable bundles just kind of run down both sides here. And I kind of tied up the ones I wasn't using up here and just kind of left it. It's kind of a mess up in here, but it works, it's functional. I know where it's all at. It's easy to modify. And then I just kind of ran them down the sides here in the channels as best I could get them. I did use a little bit of this back panel for cable management back here, just to kind of hide and tuck it up in there. Be a little bit of a challenge getting this back cover back off, or the, you know, the fan tray back here, getting it pulled out. Overall, cable management, not a problem. So just like every other case you're going to build in, you got to get a little bit creative with it. But this has got plenty of options for you to go in every direction. Just like the cooling options, you got, you know, all sorts of abilities to do whatever you want. So overall, things like installing the motherboard, graphics card, you know, fans, there's no major issues with it. A couple little quirks with building in this is these fan rails over here. Whether you choose to do an AIO or a set of fans in here, I would recommend you do these fan rails last. There was one time I had to get back in and readjust these fans, and I'll talk about why in just a second. I had to tear this all back apart because you really can't get this power supply rack and this front bracket off of here with all of this in place. And I had this in place and had to go adjust something in here and had to take this all apart. So do this piece last is my recommendation to you. Now, the reason I had to adjust these fans, and this is kind of a peculiar thing about this case, I haven't noticed this anywhere else, or if I have, I don't remember it and I haven't paid attention to it. But when you're screwing these fans in, there's the slots where you can screw fans in. Usually what you do is you screw them in, leave them loose, and you kind of adjust it all around, then tighten them all up when you got them all centered. The fan slots on this, the little rails that you put the screws in, the screws actually bite into the metal a little bit. And it's like, I don't know what other screw I would use. You need that screw to bite into the fan, unless you use some of those, like, those rubberized quick connects, but I don't think those necessarily would work here. But anyways, once you go to lock that fan down, as soon as you have that screw in, you can't move that fan up and down. Well, it's not so much a problem over here, but in the front, when I got it back to kind of together, I noticed that they're not really even, and you really can't adjust them until you go and you have to kind of remove all 4 screws, adjust it where you want, and then try to hold it tight and get those screws in. I'd be interested if anybody else has some experience with ThermalTake cases. I've built in a couple of them, and I don't recall ever having this problem with it. It's a mild gripe, but when I did that and these weren't completely centered, I couldn't just adjust them. I had to take the bracket all apart, which means I had to tear this all back down so I could get these screws back out of it. So anyways, that's why I'm saying be mindful of the fans. You got to get them centered properly the first time, or you'd be fidgeting around with it. And I'm not sure if it's this case, but anyways, if you know anything about it, let me know in the comments below. But do this piece last. Other than that, there was no major issues with the build overall. I've had way worse experiences on other cases, even though almost any case you can get a build done if you work hard enough. But this was a lot of fun to build. So anyways, I think overall it turned out really, really good. The RGB lighting elements look really good. I've got lots of real estate left over here on this one side. I was going to maybe put those triangles back in, or try some of those, air goo, those flexible lighting strips. But I almost really like just the clean look here. And of course, depending on who you ask, this has way too much RGB lighting in it as it is. So can I recommend the Tower 500 PC case by ThermalTake? Absolutely, without hesitation, I would recommend go buying this case. That's provided that you like the aesthetic of this case. I imagine not everybody does. This is personally a case that I think is amazing looking. And if you're in that same boat and you're thinking about it, just go for it. Go do it. This is a case that's got lots of room to build. It's easy to build in, relatively speaking. It's got lots of options for cooling. You do have to think a little bit about where you're going to place everything, and you can get creative and unique in how you do it. But it just looks fantastic, and it didn't present that many obstacles to me other than a couple little gotchas and caveats. But that brings us to, that's kind of the fun thing about PC building is you're going to run into obstacles. You're going to run into things that don't quite make sense and line up with your hardware, and you got to find out how to route your cables and do cable management and cooling and all that stuff. There's no doubt with this case that you'll be able to accomplish that successfully. So go ahead and go do it. And whether you choose this case or another PC case, just go out there and have a lot of fun doing it. And, take your time with it and, yeah, have fun. So that is going to do it for now. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about this case or this build, I'd be happy to hear what you think in the comments below. Share your experiences with the community with this case or any PC build of what you think could or couldn't be done with this. There's a million ways to do this differently and probably better. But anyways, be happy to hear from you in the comments section below. As always, thanks for watching. Have a great day.